This video is going over problems on task 94. We'll be using the notes that you've taken on the video. First off, what I have right here is my reciprocal identity. This you have in your notes that you took. This should be at the top. I just have this here for reference to show you that I'm looking at my notes to figure this out. So strategy 1 says rewrite in sines and cosines and then simplify. That's strategy 1. So my first step is to look at both this term and make sure that they're in both sines and cosines. So tangent x right now is not in sine or cosine. Sine is in sine, so this one is fine. What I got to do is convert this. So I'm going to look over here. Tangent of x is equal to sine x over cosine x. So this right here is going to convert to this. All I did is I substituted the definition of tangent from my notes. What I'm going to do next is put a 1 under the sign, because what I'm going to be doing is when I have two fractions divided with each other, you're going to take the bottom one, flip it, and multiply. What's cool about this flip and multiply is that this sign from the bottom cancels from the sign that's on top here. So what you're left over with is 1 on top and cosine at the bottom. Lastly, if I look at my key right here that's on your notes, 1 over cosine of x is equal to secant of x. So this is just equal to secant. So again, an overview, to use strategy 1, you want to rewrite everything into sines and cosines. Because tangent was not in sines and cosines, I had to use my key right here and make sure that it was rewritten as sine x over cosine x. Then I had to use my flip and multiply rule. Then I again looked at my key to check if 1 over cosine is equal to something. Yes, it is. It's equal to secant of x. There we go. Now we're still on the first page here. We're on number 4 on the first page. Alright, so again, this first page is all about strategy 1. Rewriting in sines and cosines and then simplifying. Let's look at the first term. This is already in sine. That's great. This is already in cosine. That is fine. This right here needs to be fixed. This is not in terms of sine or cosine. So what I'm going to do is look at my key. Tangent I'm going to rewrite as sine over cosine. So that's going to be my next step. I rewrote tangent as sine over cosine. What I'm going to do next is cancel out terms. There's a cosine on top and a cosine at the bottom. What's going to happen is that this cosine is going to cancel with this cosine. You're going to be left over with sine of x times sine of x. Sine of x, because there's two of them and we're multiplying them, means we're going to rewrite this as sine squared x. And we are basically done with number 4. Number 9. Again, the strategy is to rewrite in sines and cosines and then simplify. Sine is already in sine. Alright, let's move on. Cosecant, that's a problem. This is neither sine nor cosine. So what I have to do is look at my key right here and convert cosecant into a sine, because it's defined as 1 over sine x. So this right here is going to convert to 1 over sine x. The sine from the top cancels with the sine from the bottom. We cancel these out. What you're left over with is just a 1 on top. So this basically simplifies to just 1. Now we're moving on to the back page. This is strategy 2, the factoring and simplifying technique. First off, from our notes, we have a new identity that we created from the first Pythagorean identity. So this in your notes you should have highlighted, because we're going to be using this identity. So we're going to be using this in a second. First things first, we're going to be factoring out what's common in this first term and what's common in this whole second term right here. The common term that we could pull out is cosecant of x. I'm going to factor that out. When I factor out cosecant x, right here I'm left over with 1 minus cosecant x got pulled out, so I'm just left over with cosine squared x. Now at this point, this is when I'll be using my new identity from my notes. 1 minus cosine squared x is equal to sine squared x. So this part is going to be rewritten. Awesome. So we're almost done. This cosecant right here, if I rewrite cosecant as 1 over sine x, looks like this, I can be able to cancel a sign from here with a sign at the bottom. There are 2 signs on top, 1 sign at the bottom, so this fully cancels. I cancel 1 sign from here, but I'm left over with 1 more because we had 2. So it's 1 times 1 sign that's left over. That's just sine x. So this whole thing right here just simplified to sine x. Again, this in your notes, this identity you should have highlighted. And this I'm referencing as my notes. We're looking at number 4 on the strategy 2 page. This is on the second part of your task. Alright, so our first step in the factoring and simplifying strategy 2 is to factor out the common factors. So the greatest common factor from this term and this term. We got 3 signs right here and we have 1 sign right here. The greatest amount I can pull out from both of these is just 1 sign because they only have 1 sign in common. I factor out 1 sign and what I'm left over with is sine squared because 1 disappeared from there. And then since this got fully pulled out, I'm left over with cosine squared. So actually number 4 turns out to be a problem such that nothing happens. We stop right here. If this were to be a plus and we were to have sine squared plus cosine squared, that would be equal to 1. Unfortunately, this doesn't work out that way, so we just stop here. Let's go on to number 5. So number 5, in strategy 2, the technique is to factor and then simplify. So I'm going to look right here in my first term and then my second term and identify something I could factor out that's common to both of these. I have 1 sign right here and I have 1 sign right here. That means I'm going to go ahead and factor out 1 sign. When I do that, I'm left over here with 1 minus and just cosine squared x. This is when my new identity from my notes that you should have highlighted, 1 minus cosine squared x is equal to sine squared x. So this right here becomes sine squared x. Great, so there are 2 signs right here and there's 1 right here. Because we're multiplying both of these together and they're right next to each other, this is just going to become sine to the 3rd x. We are now on number 9 in strategy 2, factoring and simplifying. So the first step in this strategy is to factor out the greatest common term from the 2 that we have. So right here I have 3 signs minus, and then right here in this second term I have also 3 signs. What I'm going to do therefore is factor out 3 signs, which is the same thing as saying I'm going to be factoring out sine to the 3rd power of x. What I'm left over with on the inside of the parentheses is 1 minus and then cosine squared x. 1 minus cosine squared x, again I'm going to be looking at my notes, I should have this highlighted, is equal to sine squared x. So this right here is going to become sine squared x. And again, because I'm multiplying these 2 signs and I have 2 of them, I have 3 of them right here, we have in total 5 signs. So we have sine to the 5th power of x. Now we're on the 3rd page, strategy 3, getting a common denominator strategy. We'll be doing number 1. The first step in this strategy is to actually first rewrite everything in sines and cosines. So this tangent right here is not in sines and cosines, so what I'm going to do is use my key. I'm going to rewrite tangent as sine x over cosine x. So this right here gets rewritten. Sine x times sine x is going to give me sine squared x all over cosine. Alright, now this comes into the spot where we need to get a common denominator. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is rewrite this cosine x over 1. To get a common denominator of cosine x, I need to multiply this right here, top and bottom, by cosine x. Cosine times cosine is going to give me cosine squared x. 1 times cosine is just cosine. Now that the denominators are same, we're going to combine this into one fraction and add the numerators. Great, so this is actually going to work out nicely. Cosine squared plus sine squared, if I look at my key, cosine squared plus sine squared is equal to 1. This whole part in the numerator here becomes 1 all over cosine. Alright, so 1 over cosine though simplifies further if I look back at my identities right here. 1 over cosine is equal to secant x. Now we're in the strategy 4 part of our worksheet, splitting up fractions. So this technique, strategy 4, is the only technique that I recommend you do not convert to sines and cosines until you split your fraction. For example, cosecants right here, they are not in sine or cosine, right? But I do not want you to convert this yet. This strategy, you need to first split your fraction and then you convert. Let's go ahead and split this fraction. This is what that looks like. Alright, cosecant x divided by cosecant x is equivalent to 1. And then minus, we have sine x over cosecant x. After we split the fraction and I changed 1 into 1, take this cosecant x in the bottom. Now you want to make sure this is in sines and cosines. So cosecant x, if I look at my key, is equal to 1 over sine x. So this right here is going to become 1 over sine x. Now what I have is, when you have a fraction in your denominator, what you're going to do is take that denominator, flip it, and multiply. So that's what I do. See, I flipped it, and we're multiplying. So sine x times sine x is going to give me sine squared x. The 1 at the bottom is just 1. It doesn't really do much to our equation. Great, so this, from our notes, which you should have highlighted, 1 minus sine squared x is equal to cosine squared x. So this right here just simplifies to cosine squared x. So that's it. We've done some examples of this handout. Now what I'd like you to do is go ahead and try these on your own. Please go ahead and circle the ones you're having trouble with. You will want to make sure you master all the expressions on this handout in order to move on in this class.